What is Orange Shirt Day, or the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? How can I participate in this and help my kids or my family take part? If you're either a teacher or an educator or a parent, you likely want to know how to educate children in your life or students in your classroom about truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people of Canada. This is not a very easy breezy, light topic to talk about. So how do we know what is age appropriate to teach young kids about these very dark parts of history? How do we introduce these heavy topics to youth so that they're knowledgeable about what is going on in the world around them? You already know how crucial education is for shaping a young person's life in so many different ways. That's why the job as an educator or a parent is enormously important, and making the difference, making a significant progress towards truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people and communities in Canada is so crucial for you as an educator. I'm Mallory, and I help Indigenous people and allies learn about Indigenous culture and Native teachings and how to make real progress toward truth and reconciliation. In today's video, we're talking about how to talk about residential schools and truth and reconciliation to kids or students in educational environments. And I've put together 5 steps that can help you as an educator to feel more confident in how exactly you're talking about residential schools in an age-appropriate manner. Now, the truth is, a lot of the injustices that have happened towards Indigenous people were rooted in the residential school system that was created by the Canadian government. So it makes perfect sense for the biggest way to reconcile these damages that continue to get passed down from generation to generation actually starts with today's education system itself, in correcting the curriculum and not leaving the school materials in their manipulated form. So it can be really easy to avoid having these conversations altogether. And that's what the school system has actually done for decades. Well, sort of. At first, educators weren't allowed to teach about Indigenous people because the government was intentionally covering up the truth of their wrongdoings. But now that Indigenous history is allowed to be taught and is being reintroduced, it's up to the teachers and educators to develop and teach curriculum for schools, which can be very difficult to do when they were taught the exact opposite in school. Hence the need for today's video on how to talk about residential schools and truth and reconciliation as an educator. Now, just so we're clear, an educator can be a teacher, a counselor, a workshop facilitator, or even a parent, especially a parent, can and should play a major role in educating your children. Now let's get into the 5 steps that break down how exactly to talk about residential schools to kids and how to add it to your curriculum, your conversations, activities, and more. Now the first step in teaching Indian residential schools to students is to first understand your role as an educator. By role, I mean there are many different types of educators who contribute to what a student learns, right? Is your role that of a parent? Are you an educator in charge of developing curriculum? Or are you an educator not in charge of curriculum, such as a teaching assistant? Understand your position, your place, and your overall responsibility and reflect on that. Now that you know your role as an educator, your position, your place, your responsibility, you can move on and focus on the student or child, which brings us to step number 2. The second step in teaching the truth of Indian residential schools to students is to determine what age group you're dealing with. Now, there's no absolute definitive age where a child can be considered ready to comprehend heavy truths about the world. When you're considering what age group of the students are that you are teaching or your children, there are mainly 3 different groups, right? You have elementary school children. This is a very large age gap for elementary schools. This is kindergarten to grade 6. Now, these separators of elementary school, middle school, and high school exist for a reason. Now, the brain's readiness to comprehend material is a lot different when you're entering into grades 7 and 8. That's generally when sex education is introduced And it's important that we as educators are familiar with this and consider these different age gaps when we are introducing heavy topics such as Indian residential schools and truth and reconciliation. Now, high school age kids should definitely be taught knowledge surrounding the history of Canada as truthfully and honestly as an adult would. Now that you've figured out how your age group fits into how you're going to talk about truth and reconciliation, now we can move on to a very important, more personal and individual factor affecting the student's readiness with this, which is step number 3. Now, before I move on to step 3, I would like you, if you are a teacher or a parent, to comment which age group your kids are in and how you feel their readiness for truth and reconciliation is in your own opinions. Please let me know in the comments below. Now, the third step in talking about truth and reconciliation and every child matters to kids is to figure out how emotionally intelligent the specific child or group of children are. Emotional intelligence plays a really important factor in what conversations to have with them and what their feelings are going to be toward these topics. Being emotionally intelligent just means you can recognize your own feelings, talk about them, understand them, and evaluate your emotions and other people's emotions as well. The first part being recognize, how am I feeling? Understanding them. What happened that led me to feel this way? Label those or understand those feelings, what words best describe how you're feeling, express your feelings appropriately for the time and place, and then self-regulation. What can I do to maintain my feeling if I want to continue feeling this way, or shift my feeling if I do not want to continue feeling this way? So that's step 3 of understanding the child's emotional intelligence. We're then able to move forward with what content we actually want to start introducing, which is in step 4 and 5. If you're watching this video, then that means that you are passionate about learning about truth and reconciliation and restoring relationships with Indigenous people and communities. Now, I just created a new guide on how to talk about Indigenous residential schools and Orange Shirt Day, which is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So if you're an educator, teacher, or even a parent and you want to set your child up for success in handling these difficult topics like Every Child Matters, then download this free resource on how to talk about Indigenous residential schools. Grab the free guide at the link below. Now, the fourth step in teaching Indigenous history and Indian residential schools is to decide on where the best place is to insert the Indigenous educational content in your lessons and curriculum. Now, when does comparable content exist? This is where you want to insert Indigenous content. Whether it's language classes, you could talk about the existence of native languages, music class, traditional drumming, for example, history classes. This is where you want to introduce as early as possible and do not leave out Indigenous history. Religion, you could talk about Indigenous spirituality, or even in your art classes, you could talk about Indigenous art and crafts. Now, this is where the fun and the creativity of being an educator is so incredibly important. Whether you're a parent, whether you're an educational assistant, a teaching assistant, or a teacher who's developing your own curriculum, it's important to integrate Indigenous culture, Indigenous people, and Indigenous history in each of the sections that we just discussed where it is most applicable. Now, if you have situations in your classes where you can easily introduce music or dancing or any cultural activities that are accessible today, I definitely encourage you to introduce any types of media, videos, especially from the Tribal Trade Co. YouTube channel, to your class, to your students. Now, just a personal recommendation of mine, I recommend not leaving out history because it's really essential and fundamental. It's the most corrupted area that hasn't been addressed for generations. But if you're trying to integrate other Indigenous related content in other lessons, you could choose one that interests you as a teacher or educator, or one that your students are going to cling on to and find genuine interest in. So now on to the fifth and final step in talking about truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people to students is to choose exactly how to share the content. What do the lessons look like? For this one, you want to share facts in the form of storytelling. If you don't want to do this yourself, you could share one of Tribal Trade Co.'s videos. I'll share in the description below with some examples. Explain why a lot of documented materials no longer exist for educating. You could also highlight the positivity and gratitude of what remains of the culture and what is being reinvigorated of the culture. This will also allow you to practice emotional intelligence with your students and ask them how they are feeling about the content that is being shared with them. I also encourage you to make it as interactive as possible. Encourage your students to practice their creative skills, create something, engage in some type of drumming activity or day that includes learning in an interactive way. There are so many examples depending on the students that you have in front of you, the interests of your children, and what is naturally going to interest them. Whether they're a hands-on learner, something like making dream catchers, obviously learning about the significance of it is very, very important. If that's the route that you want to take, you can definitely check out this video right here on the significance of the dream catcher, which we've created from Tribal Trade Co. You can also learn about language, you can learn about powwow dance styles. The options are really endless when it comes to interactive activities for children in schools. So now there you have it. Now you can feel a lot more confident when you are talking about residential schools and Indigenous culture to children either that are yours or students in your class. Let me know what you think about these 5 steps. Is there anything that is missing? Is it helpful for you as an educator? Do you know what the Every Child Matters campaign is all about and why so many people are wearing orange shirts on September 30th? Well, we're hosting a free Truth and Reconciliation workshop series leading up to the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, where you can learn about Indigenous culture and how to participate in Orange Shirt Day. These are interactive workshops where you'll have the opportunity to learn from me, ask questions, and connect with Indigenous people and allies who have the same goal of reconciling and building a stronger future together. Save your seat for one of these free workshops at the link below.